Hi, and thanks for watching another instructional video for CSEI 1300. In this video, we are going to be talking about how to read a file using ifstream and separate different types of data in your file. So say we have a file that has maybe two types of data separated by a comma, which would be considered a comma-separated file or a CSV. So here we're looking at a name for a movie, comma, which we're going to consider a separator character, and then another type of data, which would be a value or a rating. So we're dealing with what looks like some name, which would be a data type string, and a value, which would be a data type double. And this is in the file on every line. So we have two pieces of data per line in the file. And we need to go through the file and grab both of those things and store them into separate arrays of those data types. So how do we do that? Well, the general answer is what we need to do is we need to set up a loop to traverse through the file. So we'd have to go all the way through the file. And as we go through the file, say we grab a line of information, what we want to do is then loop through that and look at each character along the way, looking for what we know as the separator character. So if we go through or traverse through a single line of information, we should be able to designate one data type from another by a separator character. So if we see the separator character, we can say like, okay, if we're at a separator character, then we've probably got a word or we've got the full amount of information for the first data type that we need to store. Okay, so if that's the case, then we need to actually store that information and then keep going and look at the next piece of information and just repeat the process. And we'll just have to do this for every line of information as we go through the file. So let's talk about how to actually do that. So I'm going to walk through some code here with you, and we're going to be talking about how to use file IO to read a file with two different types of data on a single line. So the first thing I'll note here is that I am using fstream. I'm using the string library, and I'll get to CC type later in this as an alternative. So this is just an option. This is optional for you to use. But I'm going to show you two different ways to use the comparison on a particular thing in the code. So let's look at the main. The first thing that I'm doing here is I am assigning a string to the name of the text file I want to traverse. That's the first step. The second step is that I am creating a file stream, ifstream variable. So I've opened a stream on line 12 here based on the file. So I say create this file stream. It's an input file stream. We're going to then open a file with that file stream and associate the two together. So we're saying take ratings.txt and open it through this file stream. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to think about the number of lines of input that would possibly be for either one of these things. So I think about, okay, how many lines do we have? Even though we have two values, like we have like a rating and a movie name on one line, we have 10 lines of that type of information. So basically, if we were to just ignore one of those types of data, we would have 10 of those. And then we also have another set of 10 values. So we have 10 names and 10 values. So we're going to set the size of our arrays to 10. So this would be based on the number of lines in the file and the number of things that we need to store, which coincides with the number of things we need to store, because it will be the same for both the ratings and the names. They both have the same size. So I've declared a string array movie names based on that size, and a movie ratings array of doubles based on that size. And I've initialized this to 0, and I'm going to let this just be as it is. I've got some helper variables here that I will use, and these will play some critical roles, so I'll go over them here briefly. So in order to use this, we will need to keep some kind of indexes. These are probably the most important here. So I've got an index associated with the movie names array and an index associated with the movie ratings array. And I'm going to index those when I see something that I want to add into that particular array. I'm going to have to keep a temporary variable for the line. So every time that I go to a file line, I'm grabbing that all at once. So this would be what the line would contain at any given time, would be all the information on a single line. So as we go through, that variable will hold all of that information. It'll hold two different pieces of data that we need to then parse. I've also got a double that I might need to store. It'll be a temporary variable so that we can store into movie ratings, and a count that I might need to use along the way to keep track of location. I've also decided to declare a temp string. So I have a line for the whole thing and then a temp for maybe like a substring of the line. And what I'm going to do now is talk about like what we do when we start going in here. So the first thing I would do is, if I wanted to make sure that I'm not, depending on what kind of file this is, say this ratings.txt had some kind of weird spacing to it, I could accommodate for that by using this. So if I say, like, if there's not an empty line, then we're looking at some value we want to store. So I can just handle some oddities in, say, the file type if I just make sure that I'm always looking for something with value. So here I'm saying if there is something on that line, let's do an operation with it. So we're going through the file, and every time that we use getLine in file line, we're storing the whole line from the file one at a time, one line at a time. The next thing I do is I basically say I'm going to add an additional comma. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding an extra comma at the end of every line, so that now, say I traverse all the way across here and then I see the comma, suddenly I know that I've got the color purple stored into my variable temp. And then likewise, say I moved on and I need to store the value, well, I need to have that separator character there in order for this to be recognized as completely ready to store. So when we see to the delimiter character, we're basically saying, okay, the thing that we have summed up to that point on the line, it's got every piece of it, and we need to store that somewhere into the file, into our arrays. Okay, so the first thing I do is I add the character so that we can store both of them. Then I'm going to set up some kind of another loop, and this one is a for loop because we're going through or traversing over the line based on line.length. So we're saying no matter how big or how many entries we have going left to right on a line of information in the file, we're just going to traverse across it using an extra loop. And the big thing here to note is that we have like an if-else in here, okay? And what we want to do is we basically want to say, like, if the character in the line is not a separator. So if we haven't seen the comma yet, so if we haven't gotten to the comma yet, basically we're saying, is this not the separator character? No, 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 keep going. So we keep going until we actually do see the separator character. When we do see the character that we're looking for, then we know it's time to store the data. We have a whole piece of data. So now we need to know, okay, are we looking on the left side of the original comma or the right side of the original comma? Are we looking at the string data type that we need to store? Or are we looking at the double data type that we need to store? So we can check that by basically checking what is the first character of that substring that we just generated. So here we're saying if the temp string, the substring of the line at the 0 character or the 0 index is greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 9, then we know that it is a digit. It is it is not a character, so to speak. It is a value that we can store, right? So it checks for the number. It checks for a number in the stored as a character. We can also do this through a function called isDigit by passing temp0, and this checks like a true or false value. isDigit comes through the CC type library. So if you want to use that, that is an option as well. But notice that this is using the ASCII table values, and that based on CSCI 1300, I think that this would be the correct way to implement this code. That being said, say it is a digit. Well, if it is a digit, then we actually need to do a conversion, right? Because 8.6 would be stored as string information in the text file. So we need to convert from a string to a double. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that the movie ratings array, which is double type, at some ratings index, which we have a specific index for, so we're saying this index only goes up when we add a value, will equal a conversion of temp. So we're saying take the number in temp, say it's 8.6, convert it to a double using stod, and then set it into the array at some index, which we will then increment after we store. So the moment that we actually store a digit from the file, we increase the ratings array index and then reset the temp. So this is really important because as we go through the line, we basically need temp to be empty when we go on to the next piece of data. So say that we are not looking at a digit, but we're looking at the earlier portion of the line, and we're looking at something like the color purple. Well, if we use an else, some opposite logic, we know that it's a movie title. And if we know that it's a movie title, what we can do is we can basically just take that string that is in temp, which would hold all of the name of the movie title, and we would just assign it to some movie names array at some index. And then do the same thing. We'd have to increase the index by 1 when we add a new movie name. And lastly, we would have to reset the temp variable for this condition as well. So whether we see one type of data or another type of data, and we go and store it, we need to reset the temporary string so that we can now add in some new information. And as we go, we'll basically keep repeating this process. So what the count here is doing is it's keeping track of the number of lines in the file. So count should be the same as the size when we finish the program. And we can check that this would be like our way of checking to see if we have read every single line in the file. And that way we can, if we need to do a check along the way to make sure, like maybe we get through half of the file, we can actually print the count to figure out how far we went into the file. After we're done, we close the file, and then we can actually do something, maybe we want to do some kind of a check on that information. So we've got these two arrays now filled. They've got all the names, they've got all of the ratings. Say we wanted to print out all of the information associated with movies with a rating between 8 and 10. So say we went through the file here and we saw like movies associated with a rating of 8 or higher, with 10 being the largest. Then what we could do is we could actually use a double loop, or a single loop actually, because they have the same size. And we would basically check for that rating in one of the arrays. And if that is so, then we can print out the name and the rating because they will share the same indexes. So if I ran the code, let's look at first what we get from the file. So I'm going to comment out this first, and let's see out our names and our, so say we get here, let's see out temp, and then say we're here, let's see out the temp as well, because that would contain the other type of data. So when we run this, what we'll notice is that we're getting the information one at a time. So we get this, then we get the next thing, then we get this, then we get the next thing. So basically we're handling the first piece of data, then we handle the next piece of data, and so on and so forth as we go. So now what we want to do is we actually want to print the information coming from the arrays. So that was printing directly from the file in the loop. But now that we're done with the loop in reading the file and we've closed the file stream, let's double check our ratings and names arrays for any kind of movie with a rating greater than 8. So we're saying if the movie ratings at some index is greater than or equal to 8, and at that same index it's less than or equal to 10, well, let's print the name and the rating associated with that particular value. Let's go ahead and run the code again and look at what we get. So here you can see that we created a list which is like a sub list, some smaller list of the total list of things that we had from the file, and the only things that we're displaying are things with a rating of 8 or greater. And the title here does not really matter. The rating is what allowed us to basically generate this list. So that's all for looking for specific types of information and dealing with two types of data on a line in a file. Thanks for watching and happy coding.